Every time you say no to someone, something happens inside your body before the words even leave your mouth. Your heart rate increases slightly, your chest tightens, your thoughts begin to accelerate, and within seconds, your brain starts generating reasons, justifications, explanations. Sentences you haven't spoken yet are already being constructed. A paragraph is forming before you've said a single word, and by the time you actually respond, you've already written a full mental essay defending your decision. Most people assume this is a confidence problem, a personality trait, something they were simply born with. The person who just can't say no without feeling guilty, the person who always explains too much. But that assumption is wrong. What you're experiencing is not a character flaw, it is a nervous system response, a predictable, measurable biological reaction. And once you understand the mechanism behind it, the pattern begins to lose its grip on you. Here is what is actually happening inside your brain. When your nervous system perceives a social threat, disappointment, rejection, disapproval, conflict, it activates the same threat detection system it uses for physical danger. The amygdala fires. Cortisol and adrenaline begin moving through your system within milliseconds. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing becomes slightly shallower. Your body enters a mild but very real stress response. And in that physiological state, your brain does not think clearly. It thinks defensively. It starts building a case. It starts scanning for ways to reduce the perceived threat. Not because something is genuinely wrong, not because you are weak, but because your nervous system classified upsetting someone as a threat worth defending against. And it is responding exactly the way it was trained to respond. This specific pattern has a name in psychology. It is sometimes called the fawn response. Most people are familiar with the classic stress responses: fight, flight, freeze. But there is a fourth response that receives far less attention. Fawn. When fighting feels too risky and leaving isn't an option, the nervous system finds a third path. Appeasement. Agree, explain, soften, justify. Keep the other person comfortable so the perceived threat disappears. Reduce the tension before it escalates. Make sure no one is upset. And for many people, this response was not chosen. It was trained. In early environments where saying no caused tension, emotional withdrawal, or direct punishment, where expressing a limit resulted in guilt, conflict, or damaged connection, the nervous system did what it always does in difficult environments. It adapted. It created a rule that felt necessary for survival at the time. Agreeable equals safe. Assertive equals danger. And that rule became automatic. It became wired into the threat detection system at a deep level. So now, decades later, that same rule runs in the background, quietly, automatically, even in situations that carry absolutely no real danger. A coworker sends a message asking for help on a project. A friend invites you somewhere you don't want to go. Your manager adds one more thing to your already full schedule. A family member makes a request that doesn't work for you. The situation is completely safe. There is no genuine threat in any of these moments. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It cannot distinguish between a social request in adulthood and the emotional environment it learned to survive in years ago. It detects the same signal it always detected: potential disapproval. And it responds the same way it always has, with activation, with urgency, with the impulse to explain, soften, and justify until the tension disappears. But here is the part most people never realize. The over-explanation is not solving the threat. It is reinforcing it. Every time you over-justify a boundary, your brain logs new information. It records this interaction as evidence that the boundary was not safe on its own, that your no required defense, that assertiveness needed to be cushioned with enough explanation to become acceptable. And this creates a loop. The more you explain, the more your nervous system confirms that saying no is genuinely risky. The pattern does not weaken over time without intervention. It deepens. It becomes more automatic, more immediate, more difficult to interrupt. Because you are not just repeating a behavior, you are reinforcing a neural pathway. You are training your amygdala to respond faster and more intensely each time, which is why willpower alone rarely changes this pattern. You can tell yourself to just say no and move on. You can read the advice. You can know intellectually that you don't owe anyone a long explanation. But if you don't address the underlying nervous system response, the pattern continues. Because you are not dealing with a thought problem, you are dealing with a physiological one. So the intervention does not start with the words you use. It starts earlier. It starts at the moment of activation. That exact second when someone makes a request and your system goes into threat mode. The tightening in your chest, the slight acceleration of your thoughts, the sudden urgency to respond quickly and keep everything smooth. That moment. That is where regulation begins. And here is a practical protocol built around that moment. The next time someone asks you for something and you notice that internal activation, stop before responding. Not to gather your explanation, not to prepare your justification, simply to interrupt the automatic threat response before it takes over. 3 to 5 seconds. Breathe slowly and deliberately. Extend the exhale slightly longer than the inhale. This is not a metaphor for calming down. It is a direct physiological intervention. A longer exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It signals to your brain that the perceived threat is not real. It begins to bring your cortisol levels down. And this matters because your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for clear, rational, calibrated decision-making, is partially suppressed during a cortisol spike. This is why your thinking becomes distorted when you're activated, why your responses feel urgent, why the need to over-explain feels almost compulsive in those moments. You are not thinking clearly. You are thinking from inside a mild threat response. So the first step must always be physiological. Regulate first, respond second. After that pause, after the activation has dropped enough to think clearly, ask yourself one simple question. Do I actually want to do this? Not, will they be upset if I say no? Not, how do I phrase this so they won't be disappointed? Not, what is the safest way to respond right now? Just, do I want to do this? That question returns the decision to you. It reconnects you to your own signal instead of the external social pressure. If the answer is yes, then say yes freely. But if the answer is no, your response can be short. Not because short is harsh, not because brevity is cold, but because short is regulated. A dysregulated nervous system produces long, apologetic, heavily justified responses. A regulated nervous system produces clear, calm, direct ones. The length of your explanation is often a direct measure of your nervous system's activation level in that moment. This is why practicing shorter responses is not just a communication technique. It is a regulation signal you send to yourself. Each time you offer a clear, calm no without the essay that usually follows, you provide your nervous system with new data. The threat did not materialize. The relationship survived. The other person did not collapse. Nothing fell apart. And slowly, through repeated experiences like this, your amygdala begins to recalibrate. It begins to update the old rule. It begins to reclassify assertiveness as something other than danger. This process is not fast. The nervous system does not update after 1 or 2 experiences. It updates through consistent, repeated evidence collected over time. But with each repetition, something measurable shifts. The cortisol response becomes smaller. The activation becomes less intense. The pause becomes easier to access. The explanation becomes shorter without it feeling dangerous. And what once felt like a social emergency begins to feel like a neutral interaction. Because the goal is not to become someone who never experiences activation. Activation is a normal part of human biology. The goal is to reduce the gap between what is actually happening in the present moment and how your nervous system is interpreting it based on the past. Most people who over-explain are not bad communicators. They are not fundamentally insecure. They are not permanently broken. They are people running an outdated threat detection program. One that was built for an environment that no longer exists. One that was necessary at some point and then never got updated. And the way to update that program is not through discipline alone. It is not through forcing yourself to speak differently. It is through regulation. Regulate the nervous system. Give it repeated evidence that assertiveness is safe. Recalibrate the threat response at the level where it actually lives, and the words will follow naturally. Because a calm nervous system does not need to build a case. It does not need permission to protect its own boundaries. It simply responds to what is real, not to what it was once trained to fear.